media activists on the ground. Protesters are subject to arbitrary arrests and unfair trials. Those who are injured often are denied medical treatment or feel compelled to refrain from seeking medical treatment because they feel that they'll be further abused in the hospitals. And human rights organizations are largely blocked from working, and so there's no need really to stand up for these folks who are exercising their right to peaceful protest. The United Nations Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has looked into this. They issued a review last year which found that Morocco continues to discriminate against Sahrawis in the enjoyment of their economic, social, cultural rights, including education, employment, including in the natural resource sector, use of indigenous language, and a number of other rights. The Human Rights Committee in the UN will be looking at Morocco's civil and political rights towards Western Saharans later this year, and the questions that they've released from the committee suggest that they have many of the same concerns. And concerningly, in the last year, Morocco expelled Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International from operating in Morocco, including Western Sahara. And so our visibility into the human rights abuses has been significantly diminished. We're left with getting reports from folks on the ground over phone or over other secure messaging apps, and relying on the video activism of folks there on the ground. The implication or the concern is that Morocco is going to be ratcheting up its human rights abuses, which would be consistent with its other kind of unpredictable and dramatic actions, and it doesn't want anyone there to see that happen. So that's the kind of human rights situation on the ground there, as well as some of the civil and political risks that are new this year and that are very concerning, and I'm happy to take any questions that people may have or go into more depth if people would like me to at the end.
Thank you very much, David. I'd like to now introduce our second speaker, Eric Hagen. He is the chair of Western Sahara Resource Watch and director of the Norwegian Support Committee for Western Sahara. He has followed the issue of plundering of Western Sahara's resources since 2002, both as an investigative journalist and as a civil society activist. So, Eric, I will send it over to you now.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all attending. It's in a way inspiring for us from the civil society angle to observe the interest from the investor community. We've been working on directly with investors basically since 2002, mostly in Northern Europe, meaning that we seek to advise, we have dialogue with investors, and we try to give guidance how to relate to these multinational companies. In total, we're talking about very few multinational companies or stock exchanged companies, which the institutional investors have to relate to. In phosphate, we're talking of 3 today stock exchange registered companies, and in the oil, we're talking about 2. So the total sort of portfolio for an investor to take into account is rather small, and so it's easy to get overview of what this is all about. Legally speaking, the companies try to involve, the companies involved, I mean the importers and the ones with licenses, they try to, in a way, normalize, so to say, the human rights situation in saying that this is a territory with severe, well, yes, there are some human rights concerns, and we're taking that into account. We have a good dialogue with the authorities. Now, the very unique, what was mentioned briefly just now, is the very unique international law status of Western Sahara. It does not fit with anything else we see globally. The decolonization of the world is something that belongs to the 60s, to the 70s, to the history books. And to try to fit this into the very normal place in the history books where it's supposed to be is really hard for the companies to grasp. That this is a matter of decolonization where the people have certain rights to self-determination. And that aspect has an effect on the management of the resources, which was exactly mentioned in the UN Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights last year on consent. So the special status of this means that they also have a right to manage their own resources. So that, and there we have the core problem is who is actually managing the resources. and the management of the resources by the Moroccan government is a violation of their rights in itself. So we don't need actually to go into the hardcore human rights violations in the streets. It's the actual exports is a violation of their fundamental rights in itself. So this argument, which we are arguing, we base that on the traditions of decolonization. We base it on arguments from the UN Secretariat, even from the European Court of Justice, International Court of Justice. What's so hard for us is that there's one UN document written in 2002, which is the only document specifically assessing the legality of this trade, which is going through whether or not this is legal. This was just done for the Security Council. Now this takes the reader through a long list of arguments, concluding with it will be in violation of international law if the people don't consent. Now the problem is that this 5-page document says a bit of everything. It goes through a chain of different statements, and the companies can pick and choose whatever they want from that and still find some support. They just try to omit everything that has to do with the conclusion of the opinion. So basically we're struggling with companies with very thorough assessments on, or apparently very thorough assessments on law and on ethics, without actually considering the conclusion of the UN and different UN opinions. So there we have a challenge, and it takes really an investor to study this thing in detail and study the lies of the companies and how they misrepresent the UN documents. That takes a bit of effort. So it's a challenge for all of you to actually read with thoroughness the UN reports they claim to represent. Now, if we go on to the report that we've done, since 2011 we have followed the ship movements in Western Sahara every day. It's kind of a thorough work, so we follow everything that's happening in the ports. We have sources on the ports. We follow ship registries in mostly on the Canary Islands, but also in the ports of imports. And then we combine that also with customs registries and information on ship spotters and people on the ground everywhere. So that's on this basis we can, as a report, which you find in the chat or in the handout, in the annex of that report, on the very last pages, you see the overview of vessels. And every vessel, no vessel will actually leave Western Sahara half full. They fill the vessels to the top. That's the logic of the shipping business, of course. So by just looking at the size of each vessel, we can calculate exactly how much phosphate is ending up in the different ports internationally. And if you look at the list of importers you have in front of you, you see that the number of importers are very, very small. PotashCorp and Agrim are by far the biggest. Those two alone stand for around 64.5% of all exports from Western Sahara. The remaining companies, except the one on number 6, Incitec Pivot from Australia, all the remaining ones are not on the stock exchange. They're either farmer-owned cooperatives or government-owned Venezuelan imports. The one in Lithuania, on point number 5, they withdraw from Western Sahara early this year. So what we're left with is that this is a uniquely Canadian problem for us. If you look in the report, which was done, which we did, you see from page 28, that's an overview of the companies no longer involved, and now they use different arguments for pulling out Western Sahara. Some relate directly to the human rights concerns, other to international law concerns, and some try to avoid explaining why they pulled out. So basically, one of the companies pulling out is West Farmers. They managed to do that by diversifying their sourcing, meaning that they are now able to receive phosphates from other places in the world. Now that's what we want to see. We want to see these importers. They can keep trading with Morocco. We have no boycott policy on Morocco. Morocco is a legitimate trading partner. We just don't want to see them trade with Morocco regarding phosphates from the Sahara. Most of the phosphates in Morocco are in Morocco. So if there's anything they can do on the plant itself, it would be to invest in diversifying the sourcing, so they're not longer relying on Western Sahara. We believe, so to say, that the share, having a statement on human rights assessment is a very, very, very minimum. I mean, we even see it almost like a problem in the way that we are in dialogue with the companies all the time. and we see the facade of misrepresentations that they're distributing to shareholders. So if they have a human rights assessment, we even see that even as it could even be complicated in the way that it's yet another argument that the investors have to look through, because the main problem is the import itself. It's not actually what's happening on the ground. Anyway, so very quickly on the trends. We're talking of lesser importers. We're talking of, but also the trend of what's happening on the ground, and what was not mentioned, the knowledge about this trade is really increasing within the civil society in the occupied territories and in the refugee camps. So the people on the ground are more and more aware of it, and there's a reputational risk for anyone involved in the fact that the owners of these phosphates knows what's going on. So that's one issue. Another issue which is important is the legal standing of Polisario, the liberation movement, that they were actually seen as a legitimate, with a legit standing in a court of justice in the European Union. Now that also has an effect on the company. A third one, which regarding the African Union, is that any company working in Western Sahara are not welcome in other African Union states. That is a resolution from the African Union's Peace and Security Council last year. So that also has an effect, a potential economic effect on companies being involved, that they're burning their bridges basically. Now that was what I wanted to say. Thank you so much for listening, and any of you can come to us. We will treat any dialogue with any investor very confidentially, and we all look for having these two companies, Potash and Agrium, to diversify. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'd like to now move on to our third speaker. She is Sister Elizabeth Davis and is the Congressional Leader for the Sisters of Mercy of Newfoundland and Labrador. She was an outspoken advocate for human rights at last year's annual general meeting, and she has also been a teacher, held leadership and governance positions, served on numerous boards, given hundreds of speeches, and won many awards. We can't say enough about her, so we'll let her speak for herself. Sister Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Nora. As you know, our congregation is the investor that's actually bringing the proposal to the annual general meeting in Saskatoon for the Potash Corporation. We are a small congregation of women religious with sisters in Canada and in Peru, and we do the things you'd expect groups of sisters to do. We're in education, healthcare, programs for poor people, older people, vulnerable people. And we also care now for Earth in a new way. As we've become fewer and older, we've begun to realize how we can also do ministry through how we use investments, where we invest, and how we work with investors. Next slide. In terms of, Nora, the next slide, thank you. In terms of why we are involved with SHARE, while we do invest money, obviously we don't have tons of money, and we want to use our money diligently and strategically. So through SHARE, we're able to do that. We are able to combine with other organizations who share our values, and together we do have sizable amounts of money. And we can be more targeted than in terms of where we pay attention, where we call attention, and how we respond to what we see as violations of human rights, ethical rights, environmental rights, and so on. We also, through SHARE, are enabled to exercise rights through proxies and through working with other stakeholders, such as at the meeting that we will be attending in Saskatoon. When we look at potash, we certainly don't have any joy in knowing that they are the largest importer from the Western Sahara of phosphate. So in the next slide, what does potash say about itself? We invest in PotashCorp. We look at its mission, its vision, its values, and potash says about itself that it builds long-term value for all stakeholders, that it operates with integrity, that it's concerned about the safety of people and its environment, that it will listen to all its stakeholders, that it seeks to continually improve, that they share what they learn, they are accessible, accountable, and transparent. We read that, we invest in a company that holds that position. Then the next slide, we read further. that Potash believes its responsibility is beyond its core business, that they follow highest ethical standards, and they don't just include financial performance when they're evaluating their success. They're interested in mutually beneficial relationships with communities, customers, employees, and other people critical to their success. They make decisions that consider the welfare of the people and the planet, and they hold themselves accountable. When we read those words from PotashCorp, we would expect to have a highly ethical company that is not engaged in any way in endangering the human rights of the people with whom it works. The opposite, in fact. That all of these words say very simply, very clearly, very plainly that Potash is interested in where it works, how it works, with whom it works, and how it treats everyone who has something to do with its organization. So when we as an investor then look at this organization and hear the things we just heard from David and Eric, we have a problem. The next slide. Nora, can I ask you? Thank you. So first of all, as a Canadian organization ourselves, we have certain expectations of anybody we work with from Canada that they're reflecting Canadian values. If that company has a very high stake in the work of another company, it would therefore have higher responsibility for ensuring the human rights of those who work for that second company. If it's operating in a high conflict or high risk area, it has even greater responsibility to conduct human rights due diligence, not simply for the employees of the company, but for the people of the area. We believe one of the reasons we keep shares with Potash is that it gives us the right to be at the table and the right to hold that company accountable for what it says are its values. In effect, what we just heard from both David and Eric is that Potash not only is not living up to its own words, its own vision, its own values, but just the opposite. It's actually the largest company in the Western Sahara, involved in the Western Sahara, putting at risk the human rights of its own employees and the human rights of the broader community in which that company exists. And I think the last slide says very clearly in a picture that we are involved in this because we believe the rights, the basic human rights of the women, children, and men in the Western Sahara are not being well protected by one of the largest companies dealing with that part of the world. That company, regrettably, is a Canadian company who should know better, and it's our expectation as one of their shareholders that they will do better, and that up till now, all our attempts to cause that to happen through conversation, through exchange, through engagement, both of letters and conversation, has not succeeded in even giving us any sense that there's an openness by this company to give us the kind of human rights assessment that will be publicly disclosed, done by an independent party, truly transparent. Instead, they simply say, you should believe what we're saying to you, that we're endangering no one in this area. This time last year, many of the things I would have said are the same. But what has happened since last year is making our concern greater. The things that have happened in the past 12 months are really intensifying all the concerns we had earlier, and they're adding new ones, layering on new ones, one of which is the presence of radical extremists in that part of the world and their absolutely astute ability to find any vulnerabilities like this one to intensify what they are doing. So last year we were quite concerned. This year we are even more concerned and will speak even more strongly at the annual general meeting in early May in Saskatoon.
Thank you very much, Sister Elizabeth. I'd like to thank all of our presenters, Eric and David as well. Thank you for taking us through that today. And I'd now like to open the floor to questions from the attendees. Once again, just to remind you, you can ask a question by typing it in the question box, which is at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. I did receive one question a little bit earlier asking if the slides will be available after the presentation. And I can say that yes, they will. You can either email Kevin or myself directly at share. So let me just put up the information here for our, and we will get that to you as soon as we can. So I also have another question coming in here. This one's from Jamie Govan. What has Potash's rebuke to these allegations been? I'm not sure if any of the speakers want to take that. Maybe somebody who has been, who has put the shareholder proposal forward last year.
This is Kevin Thomas from Share. Perhaps I can jump in on this. That yes, the company has provided a lengthy response on their website regarding Western Sahara, and I think Eric was right in that the companies in looking at this situation tend to provide what is at best very limited responses and somewhat misleading, in that they tend to assess the rights of workers within their suppliers' operations and determine whether they have been compliant with the code of conduct of the company, which says there are basic worker rights which need to be respected. That's not a bad thing that they're reviewing that, but it doesn't speak to the overall question of the human rights situation in Western Sahara in general and the legality of the legal risks, both so legal, operational, and reputational risks of being engaged in the import of phosphate rock from Western Sahara. So what the proposal has been asking them to do, of course, is to look at that overall question. It's again, that's part of a good human rights assessment, should include the rights of the workers engaged in the operations, but it also needs to take into account the legal, operational, reputational risks to the company of being involved there, and the looking at that in the context of international benchmarks like the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights. So far, the response from Potash has been limited in that respect, and I'll say lastly, it also has been lacking in the transparency which Sister Elizabeth spoke to. That is, much of the assessment around whether this is the correct place to be sourcing phosphate is based on information they've received confidentially from their supplier or from legal opinions they've gotten confidentially from the supplier, or from economic assessments done by this or commissioned by the supplier, but not released publicly. So it's very difficult for any investor to look at this and say, okay, how do we know how do we have confidence in what we're hearing here when it's not being done by an independent party and the results of it are not being released publicly? And hence the proposal, which says, look, we need you to speak to this by commissioning an independent party to do a review and to publish the results so that investors can actually evaluate that for themselves.
If I could add one other comment to that, Kevin, I get a sense that Potash almost sees how we treat our how the employees are treated within the company as the key question here. They do not seem to understand the point that Eric was making, that the context for that company's working in the Western Sahara is so much bigger than a company working in Quebec or in British Columbia in Canada. That it's a company working within an occupied territory, a company where the people of that territory do not have self-determination, do not have the right to make decisions about their imports. And an area where human rights violations are the order of the day if you make any protest whatsoever. So Potash seems to separate its own mind between how it would deal with its own employees in a plant in Canada as comparable to how this company deals with its employees in a company in the Western Sahara. They don't seem to pay any attention to the context which changes everything. And that's part of the ongoing challenge we have in the conversations relating to potash.
If I also may add, I agree with everything that's being stated. I'm sorry for the construction work that my neighbor just started 1 meter away from me with background noise. Now, the PotashCorp is relying on the operator, the Moroccan State Phosphate Company OCP's evaluations and audits. And when you read through the statement of PotashCorp on its website, it looks good in a way, and it looks convincing. But again, it doesn't respond to the question. And that also applies to the audits done by the operator OCP, is that we don't know what those studies actually try to find out. They say, okay, it leads to employment, but the question is then, okay, employment by whom? Or it does not look into the question of self-determination of the management of these resources. The aspect over this is a non-renewable resource that when the conflict has been solved, these resources are supposed to be used in order to build either a new state or for the benefit of the people of the territory once it has become Moroccan or Spanish or anything else. Now these resources are depleted, and the people in the refugee camps, they see those reserves being lost. This is an ethical and it's a political question, but it's also a legal question. And it's based on those legal aspects that many of the shareholders in Europe have divested, because they feel that the legality involved in ripping away non-renewable resources in this territory under this special legal status, that is in violation of international law. So, but the ethical aspect itself is a reason to to do something, even though if you would not find it to fit into any of the specific guidelines or paragraphs.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for jumping in there. I have one more question here. It says, has Polisario been consulted regarding natural resources? Have they stated a very clear no? That one's not really assigned to anyone, but if anyone wants to jump in there.
I think I can jump in on this one. I know that Polisario has protested numerous times vis-à-vis PotashCorp, and numerous times vis-à-vis each shipping company that transports to PotashCorp. And I think even, I need to check it up, but I think a demand was made or a hint was made, I'm not 100% sure, regarding a possible compensation demand to the people of Western Sahara. I mean, we're talking quite a few, I don't know, billions or whatever of dollars in lost reserves for the people of Western Sahara. So there were some hints of international criminal law or something. I'm not a legal expert. But anyone who wants to know what Polisario has stated, or I can see if those letters are public, and I can try to send it to you for those who want.
And just to jump in, yeah, they've stated a very clear no, as Eric described, and it's also been consistent across a number of related sectors, including their challenge to the EU trade agreement and their support of protests that have taken place in the occupied part of the territory against the extraction and import of natural resources. So their view is unmistakable.
Maybe I can just say one thing to this related to potash, is that the interpretation that potash tends to give in its materials on this resolution is that when they're providing benefits to the people locally in terms of jobs or other charitable benefits, that makes the exploitation of resources from Western Sahara okay under the UN's legal opinion on the issue. Well, the UN's legal opinion was quite clear that any resource development would have to be done in conjunction with the interests and wishes of the people of Western Sahara. The UN has been very clear that the parties to the dispute over Western Sahara are Morocco and the Polisario Front, which represents the people of Western Sahara. So the question of their consent is a very good one, and there's an important point to make, that there are, even though local people might get some jobs out of the employment from the phosphate production, there's a large refugee population which clearly is not benefiting at all. And there's and as long as there's no way to, or there's been no effort to ensure that the interests and wishes of the people represented by the Policy Area Front have been met, I don't think we can say conclusively that the legal test has been met either. So this is again part of why we need independent review to look at these things in light of the international legal opinion as well as the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights to determine whether this is actually a legal risk for the company. And I think one thing which has been mentioned briefly between last year and this year, last year where there's a shareholder proposal and this year where there is one again, is that there have been legal developments in the EU, for example, where the European Court has annulled parts of a trade agreement because it included Western Sahara, a trade agreement between the EU and Morocco. They annulled the parts of it that might include imports from Western Sahara because of this concern of whether this was appropriate legally. Now, that speaks to, again, a question of risks for the company, and to not assess that risk in a transparent and independent way, I think is irresponsible.
Thank you very much. I know this has already been touched on before, but I'm not sure if you wanted to go over this again. Kevin, this is a question directed at you. Can you address why a human rights assessment will help and how?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself there. That's a good question because, of course, there's, from even people here on the line, some very definitive statements about what should be done in this situation. I think as investors, the key question is for a company, as always, to start with how is it assessing its risks, and how do we know that management is both understanding the risks that it faces overseas and at home, and manage them in a way that's appropriate to those risks. And that's where we start from. I think that given that there's so much documentation around this issue internationally, the company should start from examining its own supplier relationship in a way that's independent and credible and transparent. What comes out of that is the next question is, what do you do with that? And then it's a question, how are you managing the issue? But I think it has to start from information and from management taking a really serious look at this in a way that's credible to shareholders. So while those with a lot of experience in Western Sahara will say that this is where things need to go, I think that the appropriate thing for a company to do in this situation is to start from understanding how it relates to it, and then making decisions on the basis of real, credible, and transparent information.
And if I could add to that, Nora, as well, this is a critical issue for us making this proposal at the AGM. Our concern all along has been that Potash is either choosing not to or somehow failing to understand the importance of the context in which the sourcing of the phosphate is being done. Once you articulate a human rights assessment that's open, independent, and transparent, the company itself will have a very clear statement around the contextual piece here. It's very interesting to me that there are two kind of tactics that are used. One is our concern should only be for the employees who work within our company, and yet that's not what the value statement, their core values, says. The second one is that look at all the good that companies is doing right now, building roads, building hospitals. They're doing so much good for the people of the Western Sahara. It's interesting to me that after I spoke at the AGM last year, I received a letter from the embassy for the Kingdom of Morocco, giving me page after page of all the good that Morocco is doing for the people of Western Sahara. On the surface, you would say, why would you stop them being there if they're so good for the people? Until you realize there's no sense of self-determination here. It's we are telling you what's good for you, and we're providing some of that. So those two misleading directions, I think Potash is buying into, whether consciously or unconsciously. And I believe the very act of being forced to accept an independent human rights assessment would force the company Potash, its leadership, and its employees to see the truth of the picture. And I do believe, and maybe it's the naivete of being a Canadian, I believe if Potash leadership would actually be able to acknowledge the correctness of the information we're talking about today, that they would be forced ethically to do something, either change their value statements or to do something about what they're doing in the Western Sahara.
Can I also add something? I just felt now that maybe my introduction in the beginning was minimizing or not taking seriously enough the resolution on the table. I really support it. It's a really good initiative and do support it. What we think is that it's not enough, and that is, I think from our perspective, we're working with Potash since 2006, and also studying the information they have provided to the shareholders in the past who have pulled out it's not enough. So therefore, it does not hurt if shareholders were also to request what is being done to diversify, because obviously this is not in line with what the people of Western Sahara want. So I see it as an absolute minimum from our perspective to support this great initiative, that also other demands could be made unilaterally to the companies. What is being done to diversify? Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think we should wrap up with that last question there. Thanks again to all of our speakers and presenters for joining us, and to everyone that was able to get on the webinar today. If you have any questions after we finish today, you can contact Kevin. His information is there on the screen, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. We also know that some organizations do not like to declare their voting intentions in advance, but if you are willing to do so at least privately to share, please do. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Nora, for facilitating all of this for us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for all your shares. Great initiative.